The whispers were louder than the wind. They moved in circles around Jake, soft and cold, like icy fingers brushing his ears. He stood in front of 3 fresh graves, each one covered with wet soil. The night sky above him was silent, but the voices were not. They came from the ground, from the graves, from below. And they were calling his name. Jake. Jake froze. His heart hammered so fast he thought it would burst. The voices rose again, slow and shaky, like someone trying to talk through a mouthful of dirt. Help, us. Jake. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The ground under his feet began to tremble. One of the graves sank a little, as if something under the soil pushed upward. Then the 3rd grave, the newest one, began to crack open. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Something inside the grave was trying to climb out. And before he could scream, the soil shifted, lifted, and a pale hand shot out of the dirt, reaching for him. That was the moment Jake realized he was no longer alone in Millersville Cemetery. And what came out of that grave was not done whispering. Earlier that week, Jake Turner didn't believe in anything scary. He was 16, tall, and usually the bravest kid among his friends. He lived with his mom in a small town in Pennsylvania. Millersville wasn't the kind of place where exciting things happened. It was quiet, slow, and full of old people who liked to talk about the good old days. But the cemetery, that was different. Millersville Cemetery sat behind the woods, close to a hill that blocked most of the sunlight. Trees crowded around it like giant skeletons, and old tombstones leaned in strange angles. People said that when the wind blew just right, you could hear whispers. But Jake always laughed at those stories. He didn't scare easy. At least, not until last Monday. Jake worked part-time helping Mr. Dawson, the old groundskeeper. Mr. Dawson was strict but kind, with gray hair and hands that shook when he held his coffee. He had been taking care of the cemetery for nearly 40 years. That day, as Jake shoveled leaves away from the path, he heard Mr. Dawson mumbling to himself. They shouldn't be burying 3 in one day. No, 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 not good at all. Jake looked up. What's wrong? Mr. Dawson jumped like he didn't know Jake was there. Nothing. Just old thoughts. Forget you heard anything. But Jake didn't forget. 3 graves had been dug for the Turner family. A mother, a father, and their youngest daughter. They had died in a terrible car accident 2 days earlier. Jake didn't know them well, but he had seen the little girl once. Her name was Lily. She had big round eyes and always wore a pink jacket with stars on it. She was only 8 years old. Jake had felt sad when he heard the news, like someone had dropped a heavy stone into his chest. The funeral was on Wednesday. Jake didn't go, but he saw the cars drive past the cemetery. Some people cried so hard they couldn't walk straight. Others stood in silence, staring at the 3 caskets lined up beside each other. By Thursday morning, the new graves were filled. The soil was still soft and dark. That's when the whispers started. Jake first heard them after school. He had returned to check if he left his jacket near the storage shed. The sun was gone, and the sky was turning dark. It was quiet. Too quiet. He walked past the old section of the cemetery, where tombstones were cracked and covered with moss. A cold wind blew, but Jake barely felt it. He kept thinking about the Turner family. When he reached the new graves, he stopped. He felt something strange, like someone was standing behind him, breathing softly. He spun around. Nobody. He took a step forward. A whisper drifted through the air. Soft. Slow. Almost too gentle to notice. Jake. Jake jolted and looked everywhere. Who's there? No answer. The whisper came again. Help, us. He stumbled back. For 1 second, he thought it came from the woods. But the sound didn't echo like it should have. Instead, it seemed to rise from the ground. From the graves. Jake shook his head. No, no way. I must be imagining things. But then the air grew colder. His breath came out in clouds. The ground beneath him moved. He froze. A soft, dragging sound crawled up from under the soil, like fingers pulling through dirt. And then, Jake. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't anything human. Jake ran. He didn't stop running until he reached the gates. Even then, he almost tripped. He jumped on his bike, pedaled as fast as he could, and didn't look back. At home, Jake locked his bedroom door, pulled the covers over his head, and told himself it was just stress. Or tiredness. Or something normal. But he didn't sleep. He couldn't. Because he heard the same whisper again. Soft. Slow. This time, right outside his window. Jake, please. He sat up so fast his bones hurt. He ran to the window and peeked through the blinds. Nothing. No one. Just the empty street. The next morning, Jake skipped school and went straight to the cemetery. He had to know if he imagined everything. The graves looked the same as yesterday. Fresh. Dark. Undisturbed. No cracks. No signs of anything strange. But Mr. Dawson looked terrible. His eyes were red, and his hands shook worse than usual. "You heard them, didn't you?" he whispered. Jake felt his stomach twist. "Heard who?" Mr. Dawson grabbed his arm. "When the dead whisper, you run. You never go near their graves at night. Never." Jake pulled away. "What's happening?" Mr. Dawson shook his head. "Nothing good." He left without saying another word. That night, Jake tried to stay inside. He really did. But something kept tugging at his mind. Something cold and heavy, like invisible hands pulling him back to the cemetery. At 11 p.m., he gave in. He grabbed a flashlight and snuck out the back door. The air was colder than usual. Even the moon looked strange, like it was hiding behind a thin cloud. When Jake reached the cemetery gate, the wind died completely. No sound. No movement. Even the trees looked frozen. He stepped inside. Every part of him screamed to turn back. But he kept walking until he reached the fresh graves. His breath shook. He raised the flashlight. That was when he heard it. The whisper. Not soft this time. Not slow. Urgent. Panicked. "Jake. Help. Please." Jake's heart almost stopped. It was Lily's voice. He pointed the flashlight at her grave. The beam trembled. The soil was rising. Not sinking. Rising. As if something inside was pushing up against it. Jake stepped back. The whisper turned into a choking cry. "Let me out." Jake stumbled and fell on his back. The flashlight rolled away. He crawled toward it, grabbed it, and pointed it again. The dirt cracked open. Not just cracked, split. A small hand pushed through the soil. A pale hand. A shaking hand. A cold hand. Jake screamed. The hand grabbed the edge of the grave and pulled. The ground trembled around him. And as the grave opened wider, a faint voice rose from the darkness. "Jake, don't leave me alone. Don't go, don't." Something else moved behind Lily's voice. Something deeper. Something wrong. Something that didn't sound like a child at all. Jake tried to run, but the ground shook again. The hand reached farther upward. And then, a face began to rise from the dirt. A face covered in soil. A face with eyes wide open. A face staring right at Jake. The whisper became a scream. The earth burst upward, and something climbed out of the grave. Just as Jake turned to run. Jake ran so fast he could barely breathe. His shoes slipped on the wet grass, and the flashlight bounced wildly in his hand. Behind him, the thing that crawled out of Lily's grave made a sound he would never forget. A mix between a child's cry and a deep, broken growl, like two voices fighting in the same throat. "Jaake." The voice stretched through the night, too long, too wide, like it didn't know how human words were supposed to work. Jake sprinted past the older tombstones, some so crooked they looked like thin hands reaching out of the ground. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it was trying to punch through his chest. He tried not to look behind him, he really did, but his fear forced him to glance back. He wished he hadn't. The little figure was climbing fully out of the grave now. Dirt fell off its body in chunks. It didn't move like a kid. It didn't move like a human at all. Its head twitched fast, jerking left and right like it was sniffing for him even though it had eyes. Lily's pink jacket, the one with the stars, hung off its body, torn and dirty. Jake screamed and ran faster. His legs burned, but he kept going until he reached the path. He didn't stop until he crashed into the cemetery gate. His shoulder hit the cold metal so hard he nearly fell. He fumbled with the lock, shaking so much he could barely move his fingers. The heavy chain rattled loud in the silence. Behind him, the whispers grew sharper, more focused. "Don't run." Jake finally tore the chain loose. The gate screeched open. He didn't bother closing it behind him. He just ran into the street as fast as he could, not stopping until he was 3 blocks away. Only then did he collapse onto the sidewalk, gasping for air. For a long time, he couldn't think. He couldn't speak. He barely felt alive. Then he heard a car door open. Jake looked up and saw Officer Ryan Morris stepping out of his patrol car. Ryan knew Jake, everyone in town did. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with blonde hair and tired eyes. He looked more like a high school football coach than a cop. "Jake," Ryan said, squinting. "What are you doing out here? You okay?" Jake opened his mouth, but nothing came out except a trembling breath. Ryan walked closer. "You're white as a sheet, kid. Tell me what happened." Jake swallowed hard. His voice cracked. "Something came out of the grave." Ryan blinked. "What?" Jake forced himself to breathe slower. "I saw something in the cemetery. Something in Lily Turner's grave. It climbed out. It spoke. It said my name. It tried to follow me." Ryan's face tightened. "Jake, listen, you've been through a rough week. Everyone has. The whole town is shaken up. Maybe you imagined." "I didn't imagine it." Jake snapped. "I heard her voice. I saw her hand. I saw her face." Ryan held up his hands calmly. Okay. Let's just check it out. If someone's messing around in the cemetery, we'll deal with it." Jake didn't want to go back. Every muscle in his body screamed no. But something in him, something heavy and guilty, said he couldn't leave it alone. If Lily was calling for help, and if something horrible was happening underground, he had to know. So he nodded. Ryan drove them both back to the cemetery in his patrol car. The headlights cut through the darkness, lighting up the path ahead. As they got closer, Jake pressed his hand against the window. The gate was open, but Jake knew he had left it open. What he didn't expect was the chain lying on the ground, twisted and broken, as if someone, or something, had crushed the metal like it was clay. Ryan stepped out of the car slowly. "Stay here," he said. But Jake didn't listen. He followed close behind. The cemetery felt colder than before. The wind didn't move. No insects chirped. The whole place felt like it was holding its breath. They approached the new graves. Jake's stomach dropped. Lily's grave was open. Not just open, ripped apart. Dirt was pushed outward, leaving claw marks in the soil. Long, deep marks. Ryan walked around the grave, shining his flashlight inside. "There's no body." Jake clenched his fists. "I told you." Before Ryan could answer, the wind suddenly shifted, blowing hard enough to sting Jake's face. The flashlight flickered. A whisper slid across the cemetery. But this time, it didn't say Jake's name. It said Ryan's. "Ryan." Ryan whipped around. "Who's there? Come out." His voice tried to sound brave, but even Jake heard the fear hiding under it. Then came another whisper. Soft. Slow. Coming from the direction of the woods behind the cemetery. "Help, me." Ryan swallowed. That sounded like a kid. Jake shook his head. "That's what it wants you to think." Ryan kept his flashlight pointed toward the sound. "I'm gonna check it out." Jake grabbed his arm. "No, don't follow it." Ryan pulled away gently. "Jake, if there's a child out there, hurt or scared, I have to go." He took a few steps toward the trees. Jake's gut twisted. "Ryan, please." But Ryan didn't stop. He stepped into the line of trees, and the darkness swallowed him whole. Jake stood alone in the cemetery, shaking so hard he almost fell over. He didn't want to stay. He didn't want to leave. Both choices felt wrong. Then something moved behind him. Jake spun around. The ground was shifting again. Not at Lily's grave. At the grave next to hers. Her father's. A low rumble crept through the soil. Not a whisper. A growl. The earth cracked. Jake stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a headstone. He pointed his flashlight at the grave as the soil lifted upward in a slow, heavy push. Something big was underneath. Something stronger. The ground broke open, and a giant hand, huge, gray, and twisted, burst from the dirt. Jake screamed and fell to the ground. The hand grabbed the edge of the grave, fingers curling tight around the wood of the coffin below. The sound of splintering echoed across the cemetery as the thing pulled itself upward. A head rose next. A face covered in mud, but too large to belong to any normal person. Eyes wide. Mouth crooked. Movements sharp and wrong, like it didn't belong in its own skin. Jake crawled backward on his hands. Another whisper slithered out of the creature's throat. Except this one wasn't soft. Or weak. It was deep. Angry. Jarake. The monster climbed out of the grave fully, standing taller than any man Jake had ever seen. Its limbs bent in strange angles. Dirt dripped from its mouth. And then it stepped toward him. The ground shook with each step. Jake scrambled to his feet. He tried to run, but he slipped again and hit the ground hard. His flashlight rolled away, its beam pointing uselessly at the trees. The creature moved faster now. Too fast. It reached the edge of the path. And then, Ryan burst out of the trees, panting, eyes wide with terror. "Jake, run." Before Jake could move, the creature turned its head toward Ryan. Its jaw cracked open wider than a human jaw could ever go. Ryan froze. Jake shouted, "Run!" Ryan didn't move. The creature lunged, and with one massive swipe of its arm, it grabbed Ryan by the chest and lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. Ryan screamed. Jake watched in horror as the creature's fingers tightened around Ryan's body, crushing the air from his lungs. Jake ran forward without thinking, screaming, "Let him go!" The creature turned its head toward Jake. Its eyes glowed. Its jaw opened. And then, with a sound that shook the entire cemetery, the creature pulled Ryan into the darkness of the woods, dragging him away as he screamed for help. Jake stood frozen, staring into the empty trees. Ryan's scream faded. Then another whisper drifted out from between the trunks. This time, it wasn't Lily's voice. It wasn't the creature's voice. It was something worse. A chorus. Hundreds of voices whispering at once. "Come, with us." The trees swayed. More graves trembled. And as Jake stepped backward, heart pounding harder than ever, he heard the ground behind him split open, and a second massive hand rose from another grave.